On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump took the oath of office as the 47th President of the United States, marking a historic return to power for the controversial leader who had previously served as the 45th President. The inauguration, held indoors at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda due to unseasonably bad weather, set the stage for a new chapter in American politics. With his return, Trump aims to chart a bold course for the nation, one he describes as the golden age for America. His inaugural address focused heavily on themes of unity, optimism, and renewal, urging Americans to embrace a future of strength and prosperity under his leadership. In his speech, Trump positioned himself as the champion of ordinary citizens, vowing to address economic concerns and restore America's greatness on the world stage. As his second term begins, Trump has already signaled his intentions to reshape both domestic and foreign policy, including a focus on reversing the achievements of his predecessor, Joe Biden, and asserting a more nationalistic stance on global issues. Expect this presidency to bring a whirlwind of action as Trump moves quickly to fulfill his promises. From reshaping the U.S. economy to revisiting trade agreements and security policies, viewers can expect a dramatic shift in the political landscape. This story marks a significant turning point, not just for the United States, but for the rest of the world, as Trump embarks on his second term with bold promises that will likely send ripples through the global economy and international relations. Donald Trump takes office as 47th president, breaking tradition. On January 20th, 2025, Donald Trump was inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States, marking a dramatic return to office for the controversial leader. While the event was filled with pomp and ceremony, one moment in particular stood out: Trump's decision to take the presidential oath without placing his hand on a Bible, breaking a centuries-old tradition. This deviation immediately caught the attention of the public and sparked widespread discussion. While some viewed it as a departure from tradition, others defended it, noting that the U.S. Constitution does not explicitly mandate the use of a Bible when taking the presidential oath of office. This pivotal moment sets the tone for Trump's second term, where he has already promised to challenge established norms and reshape the direction of the nation. For decades, it has been customary for U.S. presidents to take the oath of office with their hand on a Bible, symbolizing the solemnity and importance of the moment. However, this tradition has not been codified in law. The U.S. Constitution only specifies that the president must affirm or swear to uphold the duties of the office. As such, Trump's choice to forego the Bible was legal, if unconventional, and fueled discussions about the deeper implications of tradition versus personal conviction in American politics. Some critics argued that this was a sign of disrespect, while others saw it as a reflection of Trump's rejection of old political norms and his desire to redefine the office of the president on his own terms. The decision to skip the Bible was not the only striking break from tradition during Trump's inauguration. His speech, too, offered a sharp contrast to the tone set by his predecessors. Focusing on themes of unity, strength, and the beginning of a golden age for America, Trump emphasized his commitment to both domestic prosperity and global leadership. While his supporters cheered for a return to what they believe are traditional American values, his detractors questioned whether his vision would truly bring about the inclusivity and stability the country needs. In his inaugural address, Trump painted a picture of a resurgent America that, under his leadership, would overcome its challenges and emerge stronger than ever. For the millions of Americans watching, this moment was more than just a simple swearing-in ceremony. It represented the beginning of a new chapter in U.S. politics. With his second term underway, Trump's presidency is already expected to push the boundaries of what many consider conventional, with the potential for significant shifts in policies related to immigration, climate change, and foreign relations. Trump's break from tradition, starting with the oath of office, sets a precedent for the coming months, during which viewers can expect a presidency that seeks to redefine the office and chart a controversial path forward. What this means for future inaugurations and the presidency, Trump's decision to forego the Bible during the presidential oath of office, is not just a momentary break from tradition, but a broader commentary on the evolving role of tradition in American politics. While the Constitution leaves room for interpretation regarding the specifics of the inauguration process, this break from a centuries-old custom could prompt future presidents to reconsider the symbolic gestures traditionally associated with the office. For example, future presidents may choose to opt for personal items that reflect their own values, beliefs, or experiences, rather than adhere strictly to a ritual passed down through history. This change could spark a reevaluation of other long-standing political rituals, challenging the notion that traditions must remain static in an evolving nation. At the same time, Trump's choice has ignited debates about what it means to respect the office of the president. Supporters of his decision argue that the presidency is about the individual holding the office rather than symbolic gestures of the past. They suggest that by rejecting a convention that is not legally required, Trump has signaled a new era in which American leadership is less about adherence to outdated norms and more about bold action and vision for the future. This, they argue, reflects the spirit of the 21st century, where flexibility and pragmatism may be more valuable than strict adherence to tradition. On the other hand, critics contend that the Bible represents an essential part of the nation's historical identity, and by skipping this tradition, Trump may be undermining the solemnity of the presidential oath. For many, the Bible has come to symbolize the moral authority of the office and the values of integrity and honesty that the president should embody. Critics worry that skipping this symbolic act sets a dangerous precedent, signaling a disregard for the foundational principles that have shaped the U.S. government for centuries. Ultimately, Trump's decision could lead to a broader discussion on the role of tradition in American politics and whether these rituals serve to unite or divide the nation. As future presidential inaugurations unfold, it will be interesting to see whether his choice inspires other presidents to break from tradition or if it becomes an anomaly in a long history of ceremonial practices. This question about the intersection of tradition and modernity in U.S. politics is one that may continue to evolve in the years to come, especially under a leadership that is not afraid to challenge norms. Looking ahead, the significance of a non-traditional presidency as Trump settles into his second term, the implications of his untraditional approach to governance are becoming clearer. His decision to take the oath without the Bible is a microcosm of the larger shifts he aims to implement throughout his administration. For his supporters, this represents a refreshing break from what they perceive as an out-of-touch political establishment, while for his opponents, it is another example of his disregard for established norms. However, what is undeniable is the attention this break from tradition has drawn, and the potential for it to define his second term in office. Trump's presidency, already marked by its bold and often controversial decisions, will undoubtedly continue to challenge both the political system and public expectations. The inauguration itself serves as an early indicator that Trump's approach will be anything but conventional, with the rest of his first year in office likely to see further departures from political norms. The impact of his presidency on the fabric of American political life is still unfolding. His unorthodox approach may have profound implications not only for the U.S., but for global politics, as his decisions continue to reshape how America interacts with the rest of the world. As the nation adjusts to this new era, one thing is certain: Trump's second term will be defined by its willingness to break from the past and its focus on a future that remains as unpredictable as his leadership style. Trump's first executive actions, a bold start to his second term. As Donald Trump assumes the office of the 47th President of the United States for a second, non-consecutive term, his first actions in office are setting the stage for a highly charged and controversial period in American politics. On January 20th, 2025, Trump wasted no time in fulfilling campaign promises, immediately signing a series of executive orders aimed at reversing policies from his predecessor, Joe Biden. These actions are not only a direct repudiation of the Biden administration's policies, but also a bold declaration of Trump's intent to chart his own course, free from the traditional constraints of Washington politics. One of the most significant executive actions Trump took was halting key Biden-era directives, which had placed emphasis on progressive reforms, particularly in the areas of climate change, healthcare, and public policy. For example, Trump froze federal hiring, a policy that had been part of the Biden administration's broader efforts to expand government programs and services. This decision aligns with Trump's long-standing stance on reducing the size of the federal government and prioritizing budget cuts. Trump also directed federal agencies to reverse the push for remote work, insisting that federal employees return to in-person work. In Trump's view, this is essential for boosting productivity and reasserting a sense of discipline in government operations. This move comes at a time when many government offices were still adjusting to remote work after the COVID-19 pandemic, which raises questions about the long-term viability of such a policy. Perhaps the most controversial executive order Trump signed was his decision to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement once again. The original withdrawal under his first term had drawn global condemnation, and this second withdrawal is likely to reignite debates on climate change policy. While the Paris Agreement has been seen by many as a crucial international pact to combat climate change, Trump argues that it unfairly burdens the U.S. economy, especially in terms of job creation and energy costs. This move could signal a return to Trump's energy-first policies, which prioritize the use of fossil fuels and the expansion of American energy independence. For many environmentalists and world leaders, this decision is a setback in the global fight against climate change, while for others, it represents a victory for American economic interests. These executive orders are a clear sign that Trump's presidency will take a drastically different approach compared to his predecessor. While the U.S. rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement under Biden was seen as a step toward global cooperation and environmental responsibility, Trump's actions suggest a return to a more isolationist stance. This policy shift could have far-reaching effects not only on the U.S. economy but also on its global relationships. As Trump continues to push for deregulation and a return to his America First policies, his administration's approach will undoubtedly have lasting consequences for both domestic policy and international diplomacy. The impact on federal workforce and government productivity, one of the key elements of Trump's executive actions, is his insistence on the return to in-person work for federal employees. This policy is set to impact hundreds of thousands of government workers who have become accustomed to the flexibility and cost savings of remote work over the past few years. Proponents of the move argue that it will restore a sense of accountability and productivity in the federal workforce. Trump himself has been vocal about the need for federal employees to return to work in person, claiming that remote work has led to inefficiencies and a lack of discipline within government agencies. However, critics of this policy argue that it overlooks the changing landscape of modern work and the potential benefits of flexible working arrangements. Many federal workers, especially those with families or those in locations far from Washington, D.C., have embraced the work-from-home culture, which they argue has not impacted their productivity negatively. The shift back to in-person work may raise logistical challenges, including commuting costs and the potential for burnout. Furthermore, some employees and unions worry that this move is less about improving productivity and more about aligning government work culture with Trump's own preferences for control and oversight. The long-term effects of this executive order will likely depend on how successfully the government can reintegrate employees into physical office spaces while maintaining productivity. It also raises questions about the role of technology in the federal workforce. While the shift to in-person work may help some government offices function more cohesively, it also highlights the ongoing tension between traditional workplace structures and the increasing demand for flexibility in the workforce. This policy will likely be debated in the coming months as employees, managers, and unions assess the true impact on work-life balance and job satisfaction within the federal government. Global reactions to U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. Trump's decision to once again withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement is arguably his most significant and contentious executive action so far. The Paris Agreement, a global treaty aimed at combating climate change through coordinated international efforts, has been a cornerstone of global environmental policy since its inception. Under President Biden, the U.S. rejoined the agreement in 2021, signaling a renewed commitment to addressing climate change. However, Trump's administration has consistently opposed the agreement, arguing that it disproportionately harms U.S. industries and imposes stringent regulations that could stifle economic growth. By withdrawing from the agreement again, Trump is signaling a continuation of his America First approach, where global commitments are viewed through the lens of their economic impact on the U.S. Specifically, Trump and his supporters believe that the Paris Agreement undermines American energy independence and job creation, particularly in the coal and oil industries. However, the global response has been largely negative, with many world leaders, environmental groups, and climate activists condemning the move. For them, Trump's decision is seen as a step backward in the global fight against climate change, a fight that has already been challenging given the slow progress made by many nations. The U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Agreement could lead to further polarization between the U.S. and its allies, particularly European nations that have made significant investments in renewable energy and are committed to reducing carbon emissions. For Africa, this decision may also signal a missed opportunity to secure global climate financing for renewable energy projects. Trump's stance may drive countries like China and the European Union to take the lead on global environmental initiatives, potentially sidelining the U.S. in future climate negotiations. This policy shift will not only impact U.S. foreign relations, but also shape the future of global environmental policies as countries continue to work toward achieving sustainability goals in the face of a rapidly changing climate. A transformative start to Trump's second term. Trump's executive actions on his first day in office set the tone for what promises to be a transformative second term. From halting Biden-era directives to pulling out of the Paris Agreement, Trump is clearly committed to reshaping U.S. domestic and foreign policies according to his vision. While his decisions may excite his supporters, they are likely to fuel opposition both at home and abroad. As the U.S. continues to confront domestic challenges like a polarized political climate, economic recovery, and a post-pandemic world, Trump's policies will inevitably have lasting effects on how the country positions itself in global affairs. As the months unfold, the world will be watching closely to see how Trump's approach to the economy, foreign policy, and climate change evolves. Whether these executive orders lead to long-term success or unforeseen consequences remains to be seen. What is clear, however, is that Trump's second term is poised to make a significant impact on the nation and the world, with bold decisions that will likely define his presidency and reverberate for years to come. Trump's bold move pardons for over 1,500 individuals involved in January 6 Capitol riot. As Donald Trump begins his second term as the 47th President of the United States, his administration has already signaled a dramatic shift in its approach to the January 6th Capitol riot. In one of his first official acts, Trump issued pardons for over 1,500 individuals who were involved in the violent events that unfolded 2 years ago, raising eyebrows across the political spectrum. This bold move not only highlights Trump's stance on the Capitol attack, but also sets the tone for his second term, signaling a significant departure from the approaches of his predecessors. The pardons have sparked a national conversation about accountability, justice, and the consequences of the January 6th riot, which left deep scars on the nation's political and social fabric. The decision to pardon so many individuals involved in the Capitol breach is perhaps one of Trump's most controversial actions yet. The January 6th attack, which saw a mob of Trump supporters storm the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, was a defining moment in American history. It resulted in extensive property damage, numerous injuries, and 5 deaths. The event has since been the subject of countless investigations and legal proceedings, leading to hundreds of arrests and convictions. However, Trump's decision to grant pardons to over 1,500 individuals involved in the riot could significantly alter the legal and political narrative surrounding the event. Many supporters of the pardons view it as an act of clemency, aiming to give those involved in the riot a second chance, while detractors argue that it undermines the principles of justice and accountability for the violence that occurred. This move reflects a broader shift in the Trump administration's approach to the Capitol riot and its aftermath. While previous administrations have taken a hard stance on accountability, especially in the wake of events that threaten national security and democracy, Trump's approach has consistently leaned towards leniency for his allies and supporters. His decision to pardon the January 6 participants fits within this pattern, signaling his prioritization of his political base over the traditional judicial processes. In fact, Trump's rhetoric surrounding the riot has long cast the individuals involved as political prisoners, framing the events of January 6th as part of a broader struggle against what he describes as a corrupt political establishment. These pardons, therefore, may be seen as an extension of this narrative, further deepening the divisions between Trump's supporters and his critics. For many Americans, this action raises serious questions about the future of justice in the country. While Trump has argued that those involved in the riot were simply exercising their right to protest, Critics contend that pardoning individuals who participated in an attempt to violently overturn a democratic election sets a dangerous precedent. These pardons could also send a message to future generations that violent insurrection and attempts to subvert democracy are permissible if you have political support at the highest levels. Furthermore, Trump's decision to forgive the rioters could provoke backlash not only within the U.S., but also internationally, where the Capitol riot has already damaged America's image as a global champion of democracy and the rule of law. This raises the important question: what does justice look like in the aftermath of a violent attempt to undermine the democratic process? A shift in priorities, the political ramifications of Trump's pardon strategy. Trump's pardoning of individuals involved in the Capitol riot isn't just a legal issue, it's a deeply political move that carries significant ramifications for the future of U.S. politics. By granting pardons to such a large number of people, Trump is further solidifying his standing within the segment of the electorate that views the January 6th events through a different lens. Many of these pardons are likely to be seen as an expression of loyalty to his political base, reinforcing his image as a leader who fights for the forgotten man and woman in America. Trump's supporters, who have long felt disenfranchised by the political establishment, are likely to view this act as a message of support and recognition, while his critics will interpret it as further evidence of his disregard for the rule of law and his commitment to reshaping the nation's political landscape according to his own vision. From a strategic perspective, Trump's decision to pardon the rioters is a powerful move that could energize his base and boost his political capital. In a deeply polarized political environment, these pardons are likely to endear him even further to his most fervent supporters, many of whom view the January 6th event as a symbol of resistance against what they perceive as an illegitimate election. These pardons are also a message to his political opponents. Trump is willing to act decisively on behalf of those he believes were unfairly targeted by the political establishment. For many of his supporters, this move could solidify Trump's status as the champion of populist causes, further consolidating his power within the Republican Party. However, the political fallout from this decision is not likely to be confined to Trump's base. Critics have already condemned the pardons as an affront to American democracy, with some arguing that they represent a tacit endorsement of the violent actions that occurred on January 6th. By choosing to pardon individuals who played a role in an attempt to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power, Trump may alienate moderate Republicans and independents, further deepening the divide in the country's already fractured political landscape. This decision may also provide ammunition for Democrats and other opponents to argue that Trump's administration remains committed to undermining democratic principles, an argument that could play a key role in the next election cycle. The broader implications, legal and international reactions to Trump's pardons. Trump's pardoning of over 1,500 individuals involved in the January 6th riot carries significant legal and international implications. Legally, the pardons raise questions about accountability in the face of insurrection. While the president has the constitutional power to issue pardons, this power is not absolute, and the decision to pardon a large group of individuals involved in an attempt to overturn a democratic election may be viewed by some as an overreach of executive power. Legal experts will likely debate whether Trump's decision undermines the rule of law and whether it sets a dangerous precedent for future presidents to pardon individuals involved in similar attempts to disrupt democratic processes. Internationally, the decision to issue such widespread pardons could further damage the United States' image as a global leader in promoting democracy and justice. The January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol was watched by millions around the world, and Trump's decision to pardon those involved could send a message to other nations that similar acts of political violence could go unpunished. This could further erode America's standing on the world stage and influence how other countries approach issues of democracy and the rule of law. Furthermore, countries that have long looked to the U.S. for guidance on human rights and the protection of democratic institutions may begin to question the credibility of America's moral leadership. Looking ahead, a polarizing legacy as Trump's second term unfolds, his decision to pardon over 1,500 individuals involved in the January 6th Capitol riot will likely remain one of the most polarizing aspects of his presidency. For his supporters, this move will be seen as a victory, while for his detractors, it will be viewed as a betrayal of the fundamental principles that underpin American democracy. the legal and political ramifications of this decision will continue to unfold, and it will shape the broader national conversation about justice, accountability, and the future of American democracy. As the country moves forward, one thing is certain. The legacy of January 6th and the pardons Trump issued in its aftermath will continue to haunt the nation for years to come. The future of U.S. Africa relations, what Trump's return means for Africa's economy. With Donald Trump's return to office as the 47th President of the United States, a wave of uncertainty is sweeping across Africa as the continent braces for the economic impact of a shift in U.S. foreign policy. Trump's America First stance, which dominated his first term, has already raised alarms about the future of U.S.-Africa relations. While specific policies remain unclear, the implications for trade, investment, and diplomatic ties are becoming a focal point for many African countries. From potential changes in trade agreements to shifts in foreign aid, the coming years could reshape the economic landscape for African nations as they adapt to an administration that may prioritize U.S. interests over international partnerships. Trade relations, a potential rethink of African export opportunities. One of the most immediate concerns for Africa's economy is the future of trade relations with the U.S. Under Trump's previous administration, trade was often viewed through a protectionist lens, with a focus on reducing trade deficits and bringing more jobs back to the U.S. This could result in a reevaluation of existing trade agreements, including those that benefit African exports to the U.S. For example, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which allows sub-Saharan African countries duty-free access to U.S. markets for a variety of products, is under scrutiny. The future of this agreement, which has been a cornerstone of U.S.-Africa trade relations, could be at risk if Trump pursues his goal of reducing trade imbalances. Kenya, which has been a major beneficiary of AGOA, may find its trade dynamics with the U.S. dramatically altered. As a key exporter of agricultural products such as flowers and tea, as well as textiles and apparel, Kenya's economy stands to lose billions in potential revenue if tariffs are introduced or trade deals are renegotiated. Trump's administration has already suggested that tariffs on imports from developing countries could be increased, and this shift could result in more stringent trade barriers for African nations. Countries that have enjoyed preferential treatment under AGOA may find themselves at a disadvantage if these agreements are revised or revoked, potentially harming industries that rely heavily on U.S. markets. Shifts in foreign aid, a new approach to U.S. Africa. Diplomacy, another area where Trump's return to office is likely to have a significant impact, is foreign aid. During his first term, Trump prioritized reducing U.S. foreign aid, especially to countries that he felt were not contributing enough to U.S. interests. His administration cut billions of dollars in aid to several African countries, especially in the areas of health, development, and education. This shift in foreign policy was controversial, with critics arguing that it undermined the U.S.'s role in supporting Africa's growth. If Trump continues with this approach, it could mean a reduction in the resources available for health programs, like those addressing HIV, AIDS, and malaria, which rely heavily on U.S. support. However, some experts suggest that Trump's administration might not abandon Africa entirely. Instead, it could place more emphasis on economic partnerships that benefit U.S. interests, such as energy projects, natural resource extraction, and infrastructure development. Trump's focus on boosting U.S. economic growth could lead to an increase in investments in African countries that align with U.S. business interests, particularly in sectors like oil, gas, and minerals. While this may not be the type of aid traditionally seen as philanthropic, it could open up new avenues for African countries to develop their economies, albeit with a more transactional focus. The key for African nations will be to navigate these changing priorities and find ways to capitalize on any new opportunities for economic engagement, particularly in sectors that align with U.S. priorities. Geopolitical influence and Africa's strategic importance beyond trade and foreign aid. Trump's return to office may also influence Africa's geopolitical standing. With China and Russia increasing their influence across the continent, Trump's administration could focus more on countering these powers, leading to increased competition for economic partnerships and investments. Africa's natural resources, including oil, minerals, and rare earth elements, have become central to global strategic interests, and the U.S. will likely seek to strengthen its ties with key African nations to ensure its place in this high-stakes Competition, for instance, countries like Angola, Nigeria, and South Africa could see increased attention from U.S. policymakers, especially as they hold significant mineral and energy resources that are crucial to both American industries and global supply chains. However, this also means that African nations will have to carefully balance their relationships with both the U.S. and China, which has become a major player in the region, offering loans, infrastructure development, and trade deals in exchange for access to resources. This rivalry could present both opportunities and challenges for African governments as they navigate the interests of competing superpowers looking to secure their future in the African market. Adapting to change. Africa's path forward. As Africa faces the uncertainty of Trump's second term, the continent's leaders will need to adapt their strategies to navigate the shifting dynamics of U.S. Africa relations. Whether it's renegotiating trade agreements, securing new investment opportunities, or adapting to a possible reduction in foreign aid, African countries will have to be proactive in ensuring their economic stability and growth. Some nations may find new avenues for cooperation with the U.S., particularly in sectors like energy, technology, and infrastructure, while others may be forced to diversify their partnerships with other global powers, such as the European Union, China, and Russia, to mitigate the risks of a reduction in U.S. support. In the coming months, African countries will need to reassess their diplomatic and economic strategies to secure the best outcomes for their people. Trump's America First approach may challenge long-standing trade and aid relationships, but it could also create opportunities for African nations to leverage their natural resources and geopolitical importance in new ways. For the rest of the world, the evolution of U.S.-Africa relations under Trump's second term will be a defining story in the global economic landscape. How Africa responds to these challenges will shape the continent's economic future and its position on the world stage. President Trump's return. What it means for Africa's economy and U.S.-Africa relations. The inauguration of Donald Trump as the 47th President of the United States has sparked renewed discussions about the future of U.S.-Africa relations, particularly concerning the potential economic impacts on the continent. With Trump's return to the White House, African leaders are closely watching to see how his America First policies will shape trade, foreign aid, and investment in Africa. While the specifics of his administration's approach remain unclear, there are several key areas under scrutiny that could either create opportunities or pose significant challenges for African nations. The biggest concern centers around U.S. foreign aid, with many wondering whether the new administration will reduce support for health and development programs that have become vital for numerous African countries. The future of U.S. foreign aid in Africa. During his first term, Trump made it clear that he believed the U.S. should limit its foreign aid expenditures, especially to countries that did not align with U.S. interests. His administration scaled back financial support to several countries, prioritizing what he called America First over global humanitarian efforts. This has led to concerns that Africa, which heavily relies on foreign aid for everything from healthcare to infrastructure development, could see cuts in essential programs. Key initiatives, such as the fight against HIV, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis, as well as other public health and social development programs, often rely on U.S. foreign aid, which makes up a significant portion of the financing. For many African nations, the fear is that Trump's policy could harm these crucial efforts. The U.S. has historically been one of the largest contributors to global health programs, and reductions in aid could jeopardize progress made in key sectors. Moreover, the economic impact of such reductions would be deeply felt by countries with fragile economies that are already struggling with high levels of poverty, unemployment, and health crises. For example, countries like Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, which have benefited from American foreign aid programs, would face increased difficulty in meeting their development goals without this critical support. However, some experts remain hopeful that Trump's second term could bring new economic opportunities to Africa, despite the potential reductions in aid. His approach to foreign policy could shift towards more trade-driven strategies, focusing on economic growth rather than charity-based assistance. For African nations that are seeking new economic partnerships, particularly in sectors like agriculture, energy, and technology, this focus could open doors for more direct investment and trade agreements. If Trump prioritizes market-driven solutions over traditional aid, African countries might have an opportunity to tap into new sources of financing that could help diversify their economies and boost growth. The potential renewal of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. One potential silver lining for Africa in Trump's second term could be the renewal and expansion of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, a trade agreement that has provided duty-free access to the U.S. market for qualifying African nations since 2000. AGOA has been a cornerstone of U.S. Africa economic relations, promoting increased exports of African goods, such as textiles, agricultural products, and energy resources. It has significantly benefited African economies by creating jobs, boosting trade, and fostering economic growth. AGOA's future under Trump, however, is uncertain. While the Obama administration focused on expanding trade and investment through agreements like AGOA, Trump's first term saw a more protectionist approach that sometimes worked against multilateral agreements. There is concern that, under Trump, AGOA could face reductions or changes that might limit the benefits for African countries. However, some analysts suggest that if Trump is looking to strengthen U.S. economic ties with Africa to counter China's growing influence on the African continent, the renewal of AGOA could become a key tool in his second term. By offering African countries increased access to U.S. markets and reinforcing trade relations, the U.S. could foster stronger economic ties with the continent, providing both sides with tangible benefits. If AGOA is renewed and enhanced, African nations could see a rise in exports to the U.S., particularly in industries like agriculture and manufacturing. This would not only help stimulate job creation in key sectors, but also provide African economies with the opportunity to diversify their exports and reduce dependency on foreign aid. Countries such as Ethiopia, Kenya, and Ghana, which have made significant strides in using AGOA to increase exports, could further benefit from such a policy. Trump's decision on AGOA will likely be a critical factor in shaping U.S.-Africa relations in the coming years, with the potential to positively impact economic growth across the continent. Navigating the shifting U.S.-Africa relations, opportunities and challenges ahead. While Trump's return to office presents potential opportunities for Africa in terms of trade and investment, it also comes with significant challenges. The America First approach, which emphasizes U.S. interests above all else, could create a tense atmosphere for African nations that are trying to balance relationships with the U.S., China, and Europe. China's increasing presence in Africa through infrastructure projects and trade agreements has already shifted the economic landscape, and Trump's stance on countering China could affect how the U.S. interacts with African countries that have strong economic ties with Beijing. Moreover, Africa's reliance on foreign aid and investment means that shifts in U.S. policy could have profound implications for social and economic progress. While Africa may benefit from increased trade and investment, the loss of aid could hinder the continent's development efforts, especially in sectors like health and education. African leaders will need to carefully navigate these challenges, ensuring that their countries are not left behind in the global economic competition, while also advocating for continued support from the U.S. and other Western partners. In conclusion, the future of U.S.-Africa relations under President Trump's second term is filled with both risks and rewards. The possibility of reduced foreign aid is a significant concern for many African nations, particularly in the health and development sectors. However, the potential for renewed trade agreements like AGOA and increased investment opportunities could provide African countries with new avenues for economic growth. As Trump takes a more transactional approach to foreign policy, African nations will need to strategically position themselves to take advantage of the opportunities while mitigating the risks. The coming years will be crucial in determining how the U.S. and Africa will navigate this evolving relationship and whether the continent can leverage new partnerships for long-term prosperity. Trump's return shaping Africa's economic future. Amid geopolitical shifts with Donald Trump's return to the White House for his second term, Africa's economic future is poised at a crossroads. As the 47th President of the United States, Trump's policies are expected to significantly impact U.S.-Africa relations, and African nations are preparing for both opportunities and challenges. The continent's strategic importance, especially in light of growing Chinese and Russian influence, is pushing Africa to the forefront of geopolitical competition. While the specific policies under Trump's second term remain unclear, one thing is certain: Africa is expected to play a pivotal role in shaping the global economic landscape. From trade and foreign aid to investment and security partnerships, The economic ramifications for African nations are already being hotly debated. Geopolitical influence, U.S. focus on Africa's strategic role. Africa's geopolitical importance has been steadily growing in recent years, with global powers increasingly vying for influence. China and Russia have made significant inroads into the continent, establishing trade agreements, securing resource deals, and building infrastructure, often in exchange for access to Africa's vast natural resources. As the U.S. seeks to counter these growing influences, Trump's administration is expected to focus more on Africa, ensuring that the continent remains aligned with Western interests. This shift could lead to an intensification of competition for economic partnerships, particularly in sectors like mining, energy, and agriculture, where Africa holds significant global importance. In his first term, Trump's approach to foreign policy was transactional and focused on prioritizing American economic interests. The return of this America First stance could mean a reevaluation of how the U.S. engages with African nations, potentially shifting resources away from aid-based relationships and towards more strategic economic partnerships. For countries like South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya, which have strong trade ties with the U.S., this shift could bring both positive opportunities and tough negotiations. For example, the U.S. might push for access to Africa's oil reserves or rare earth minerals, critical for global technology supply chains, while emphasizing the need for African countries to align with U.S. policies on trade and security. The competition for Africa's economic favor will be fierce, with China and Russia pushing their own agendas on the continent. China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, for example, has already led to substantial investments in African infrastructure, from roads to railways, while Russia has been strengthening its military presence and resource extraction agreements. As a result, African nations will have to carefully balance their relations with the U.S., China, and Russia, navigating this global power struggle to secure the best possible economic outcomes. Increased competition for economic partnerships and investments. Trump's second term is likely to see an intensification of competition for African economic partnerships and investments. Africa is home to a young and growing population, abundant natural resources, and a rapidly expanding consumer market, factors that make it an attractive destination for foreign investment. However, the U.S. is now competing with China, the EU, and other global powers for a piece of this increasingly important market. While Trump's administration has historically been more focused on reducing trade deficits and favoring direct investments over multilateral trade deals, Africa's role in this competition will grow. African countries will need to carefully evaluate their options as they seek to maximize investment opportunities. The Trump administration may push for bilateral agreements that favor U.S. businesses and industries, particularly in sectors like energy, mining, and agriculture, where Africa holds substantial global influence. This could lead to an influx of American capital and expertise in key sectors, but it could also come with strings attached. For example, U.S. investors may seek more favorable terms, such as greater access to Africa's natural resources or reduced trade barriers for American companies operating on the continent. On the other hand, Chinese investments have often come with fewer conditions, but have raised concerns about debt sustainability and political influence. Russia's involvement in Africa, particularly in the security and mining sectors, could also intensify, potentially leading to a more complex geopolitical environment. As such, African governments will need to weigh the benefits of each partnership, carefully ensuring that they maintain control over their resources and policies while fostering economic growth. In this competitive landscape, African nations will have to ensure that they are not simply passive players, but active negotiators who can leverage their strategic importance to secure better deals. What's at stake? Economic growth versus political influence. The increasing focus on Africa's strategic importance is not just about economic growth. It's also about political influence. As the U.S., China, and Russia vie for dominance in Africa, the continent's leaders are increasingly faced with a difficult balancing act. They must navigate competing foreign interests while pursuing their own development agendas. In this context, economic partnerships will not just be about financial returns. They will also have political and diplomatic ramifications. For example, a country like Ethiopia, which has seen significant investment from China in infrastructure projects, might find itself caught between two powerful competing interests if the U.S. steps up its own economic engagement. Similarly, countries with vast oil and mineral resources such as Angola or Nigeria will have to carefully manage their relations with foreign powers to avoid being caught in a race for control of these critical assets. As these nations seek to expand their economies, they must ensure that they are not compromising their political sovereignty or long-term development goals in exchange for short-term financial gains. Africa's growing influence on the global stage means that its leaders will need to become more strategic in their diplomatic and economic decision-making. The competition between the U.S., China, and Russia could help drive infrastructure development and job creation, but it also presents risks if African nations fail to secure favorable terms in their agreements. The challenge for African governments is to build strong, diversified economies while avoiding overdependence on any one foreign power, ensuring that they are not simply pawns in a geopolitical game, but active participants in shaping their own futures. What's at stake? Economic growth versus political influence. The increasing focus on Africa's strategic importance is not just about economic growth. It's also about political influence. As the U.S., China, and Russia vie for dominance in Africa, the continent's leaders are increasingly faced with a difficult balancing act. They must navigate competing foreign interests while pursuing their own development agendas. In this context, economic partnerships will not just be about financial returns. They will also have political and diplomatic ramifications. For example, a country like Ethiopia, which has seen significant investment from China in infrastructure projects, might find itself caught between two powerful competing interests if the U.S. steps up its own economic engagement. Similarly, countries with vast oil and mineral resources such as Angola or Nigeria will have to carefully manage their relations with foreign powers to avoid being caught in a race for control of these critical assets. As these nations seek to expand their economies, they must ensure that they are not compromising their political sovereignty or long-term development goals in exchange for short-term financial gains. Africa's growing influence on the global stage means that its leaders will need to become more strategic in their diplomatic and economic decision-making. The competition between the U.S., China, and Russia could help drive infrastructure development and job creation, but it also presents risks if African nations fail to secure favorable terms in their agreements. The challenge for African governments is to build strong, diversified economies while avoiding overdependence on any one foreign power, ensuring that they are not simply pawns in a geopolitical game, but active participants in shaping their own futures.